little nuns and their cheeky little, Reverend Mother, we have sinned. Oh, magnificent. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Cinema Psych Podcast, the podcast where psychology meets film. I'm your host, as always, Dr. Alex Swan, and in this episode, we're going to get a little festively musical. Yes, we're going to start the year out with a musical. So, what musical? Well, The Hills Are Alive with The Sound of Music. Yep, that's what we're doing. The 1965 American musical drama, produced and directed by Robert Wise, based on the Rodgers and Hammerstein's musical of the same name that came out in 1959, which in and of itself is based on the 1949 memoir, The Story of the Trapp Family Singers by Maria von Trapp. Hey, that's the main character of this film. Yes, the Von Trapps and all of the characters in this movie are based either on real people or the people themselves, in the sense that, you know, they didn't change the name, right? So we've got the 1949 memoir, which is Maria von Trapp writing about her life and how she came to know these kids and the Captain von Trapp and so on and so forth. And then Rodgers and Hammerstein made it into a musical because, of course, they are the family singers. So, yeah, you gotta have singing and, of course, dancing involved in a musical. And then, of course, Robert Wise came around and was like, you know what? We're going to make this into a musical movie. A musical movie. 6 years. 6 years. So the movie stars as Maria von Trapp, Julie Andrews, in my favorite role of hers. She is brilliant. She looks phenomenal. She sings phenomenally on set. It's so good. She's so good in this movie. And she's got that cheeky little grin throughout, just telling people, this is me and I'm the problem. It's almost like Taylor Swift was like, yeah, hi, I'm the problem, it's me, and was channeling Maria von Trapp. What do you do with the problem? Like Maria, right? The film also stars Christopher Plummer as Captain Georg von Trapp, Richard Haydn, Peggy Wood, Charmian Carr, Eleanor Parker, and then a bunch of children of whom I am not going to go through the names. You can go look them all up. They're quite good in their roles. Fun fact that I learned about the Von Trapp family is, so the movie is, of course, set in and around the Nazis rising to power in Germany and up and through the Anschluss of Austria in 1938. Well, Georg von Trapp as a captain in the Austrian Navy, which is funny because Austria is landlocked. How do you have an Austrian Navy? That's what I'm thinking, right? You have to pay for parking your boats somewhere. So anyways, that's my little like, what? But he was a captain in the Austrian Navy. Anyways, not a fan of the Nazis, not a fan of the Anschluss, and so tries to run away with his new family. Yes, he does marry Maria, that problem. But in any case, they do get away. And the fun fact that I learned that I did not know is they were able to, of course, get out of Austria. They did not have to climb the Alps as they show in the movie, but at the end of the movie. But they do make their way to Vermont, US, and open up a ski resort. And it's still in the family, still like you can go there, and I think get a lot of the actual Von Trapp history, not the musical Roger Hammerstein and the Robert Wise like dramatizations of all of it, but like actual history about this family, which I think is pretty cool. I don't ski, so I don't think I'll ever go there, but this is my second favorite musical. I will let you guess what my first favorite film musical is, but in any case, let's move on with this one. I also think it's great that they filmed in Salzburg for the exterior shots. Everything that was inside was filmed in Los Angeles in 1964. Amazing. In any case, highest grossing film of all time in 1966, surpassing Gone with the Wind. 283 million admissions worldwide and earned $286 million at the time. Wild stuff. Received 5 Academy Awards, Best Picture, Best Director, Golden Globe for Best Motion Picture and Best Actress for Julie Andrews, the DGA Award for Outstanding Directorial Achievement, and the WGA Award for Best Written American Musical. In 1998, the AFI, American Film Institute, listed The Sound of Music as the 55th greatest American film of all time and the 4th greatest film musical. It is my second, though, I said, right? And it was selected by the Library of Congress for preservation in the National Film Registry for culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant do-re-meing, right? Am I right? So we're going to get through the meat of this movie. There is a lot of psychology in this movie, and so we're going to get to quite a bit of it, and with that, the plot. There's not really a ton of like beatiness to the plot. I mean, Maria joining the kids, yeah, okay, but we'll talk about like why Maria's there, what's she doing, blah blah blah, in case you forgot this cultural touchstone hallmark of American film history. It is one of the best films of the latter half of the 20th century, before 21st century kind of took things in a different direction. So with my guest who teaches about musicals, we're going to jump right in to those hills and the sound of music. My guest host today is Dr. Jill Swirsky. Jill is currently an assistant professor of psychology at Holy Family University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She is a developmental psychologist by training, but her research interests range from adolescent social development to feminist psychology to the psychology of popular culture. She made it to the right place. Although she cannot sing and dance at all, myself included, Jill has always enjoyed watching others who could do so, hence her love of musical theater. In her free time, she enjoys reading fantasy novels, crafting, and binge-watching Netflix with her husband Mike and cats Newt and Copper. Jill, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to chatting.
Absolutely. Happy to have you on. Before we start discussing the film and the psychology, I wanted to ask your thoughts about this particular film, The Sound of Music. In general, what you think of the directing, the acting, the plot, all of that kind of stuff. I know it might not be like, your master's thesis here, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's actually a really tough question for me. I'm not super great at analyzing the theatrical aspects of a show. The best I can say is that I've always really enjoyed the movie.
That's fair.
I have always had theater as part of my life. I like to joke that I am a consumer of theater. I am not a creator of theater. My parents always took me from a very young age. And so this was just one that I kind of connected with early on. I find the songs and the characters all really compelling. What I
Mhm.
also like about The Sound of Music is that while it's based on a true story, which actually not a lot of people tend to know, the movie
Right.
is quite fictionalized.
Oh,
There's
yeah,
actually,
absolutely.
I mean, what movie isn't, right? But in major way, they took some pretty major creative liberties. There's some really interesting articles about and even by the real Maria von Trapp,
Absolutely.
who
Yeah.
also makes a cameo at one point in the movie, which is
Oh,
pretty
she
cool.
does?
She
Oh,
does.
I missed that.
It's
Oh, that's
very quick.
is she at the party?
No, she's
Oh.
actually in it's during Do Re Mi. There's a scene where they're dancing on the fountain, and she makes it's a split second. If you're not looking for it, you'll
Okay.
miss it. But she makes a very quick cameo. But if you read her stories or you look into the true story, it actually tells a whole nother tale of what happened with the Von Trapp family. That's a whole different conversation. Look it up if
Right.
you're interested. For now, I think we can kind of stick with the relationships and the psych principles that are portrayed by the characters, because that's what I find really cool.
Right. And we will for sure get into that. I wonder if and not to, throw Rogers and Hammerstein under the bus, but I wonder when they were making the stage play, and of course the songs that go with the stage play, they were like Von Trapp family singers, gold, and then didn't read the rest of the book.
you know,
They just saw the title and were like, let's do it.
let's
And
roll
then
with it.
they're like, okay, it happens during the Anschluss. Guy doesn't like the Nazis. All right, let's see what we can do with this, right?
Who knows?
Songs. And that's what people remember about this movie, right?
Exactly.
The songs, like all of them are classics, not just for the age of the movie. Of course, the more you hear a song being played, the older a song is, the more that you'll like it, right? Mere exposure effect and all.
Sure.
But I feel like these songs are just good.
Yeah. Yes. It's
And of course, Julie Andrews is amazing,
phenomenal.
right? So let's pivot to the psych stuff. So
Yeah.
we connected, and you mentioned the musical theater and of course musical film angle, and so I asked you for a couple of examples, a couple of suggestions for what film musicals you could bring to the discussion, and one of the suggestions was The Sound of Music, of course. So what, just broadly speaking, the psychological aspects that made you suggest The Sound of Music?
Yeah, and that was a tough choice, because kind of one of my ideas, and that I'm working with my team right now, is that psychology is in everything, right? You could literally pick any movie, any musical, any story, and there's going to be psychology in it, because it's all about human interaction.
Right.
What spoke to me about The Sound of Music, there's a couple things. First, I'm a developmental psychologist by training. So for me, there's a lot of different stages of the lifespan that are showed. And so that is really exciting. But let me take you back a few years. A few years ago, I was driving to work. I was badly singing along to my Wicked soundtrack.
But you were in your car.
I was in my car, driving to work.
So nobody could see you.
Nobody could see me. And more importantly, nobody could hear me.
Yes.
Singing along. And I heard the line, "Are people born wicked, or do they have wickedness thrust upon them?" And I stopped. And I remember thinking, that is basically the age-old question of nature versus nurture. And so that moment is really what inspired me to start thinking about the ways that psychology concepts appear in all stories, but particularly in classical musical theater pieces, and the ways in which music helps to tell those stories in ways that classic film doesn't. And so The Sound of Music has just always been one of my favorites. It's one that a lot of people connect with. It's kind of timeless. They still play it on TV around Christmas, right? It's a lot of families come together to watch it.
Right.
So for a lot of reasons, it seemed like a great choice for this discussion. But I also prefer stories that are less on the nose. It's really easy to talk about the psychology in something like Dear Evan Hansen or Jagged Little Pill.
I see what you mean.
Right.
Yeah, where the psychology is the feature.
Yes. Those are, and mind you, we could have great conversations about the psychology in those stories, but those are more on the nose, right? The psychology is obvious. I like the ones that are less obvious. Part of what I enjoy is showing how any and every story really contains those psychology themes and concepts. And so kind of put all that together, and here we are discussing The Sound of Music.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit on a very important point about really the nature of this show. Because, yes, there are a lot of films on the podcast that I've done over the last 5.5 years that the psychology is on the nose, like Memento, for example, right?
Sure.
Absolutely a movie about memory.
Yeah. Everybody wants to talk about Inside Out 2 now, right? Like it's
Inside Out. Yeah, absolutely. Inside Out 2, for sure. But I think the rest of the filmography, I don't know, the discography of this podcast, I don't know what you call the list of podcast episodes.
It's a great question. I don't know either.
That you'll see a lot of these like, I think there's a nugget in there. And I do agree, Sound of Music does have those nuggets. And to just piggyback off a point that you made about the family, these I was telling and listeners, I was telling Jill before we started recording that I showed my kids the movie for the first time. I've probably seen The Sound of Music like 3 or 4 times in my life. Maybe not all at once in all one sitting. It's a 3-hour movie, but and part of this last, winter break, we did take it in 3 chunks, 1 hour, hour 2, and then hour 3.
A lot of movies.
And yes. And I love how there is still, Disney has not touched this. There is still the intermission title card. It's wonderful. I'm so glad they haven't touched that. I mean, you obviously are fast forwarding through that if you really need to, or you could let it keep playing and go to the bathroom or get a snack or something. I don't know. But the kids, 10 and 8, for those of you who are not familiar with my family, they loved it at the end. They were fans of it at the end. They were bored of it at the beginning, and I can understand why. Yep. But as soon as I started relating, like, oh, there's that song that you may have like heard of in the past, or my son's learning clarinet, so I was like, look at the do re mi and apply that to the notes that you play on your clarinet. I mean, there's a 1-to-1 correspondence there. So they ultimately liked it, and I think it's a really good one to have with kids because of the different ages of the children, of the Von Trapp children in the family.
Yeah, they can relate.
Named it the 55th best American film, and they named it the 4th greatest film musical. I said in the intro, this is my second favorite film musical. Where does it rank on your list?
Oh, it's in my top 5.
Top 5? Okay.
Top 5. Some of that is nostalgia, because I have fond memories of watching it as a child, seeing it live with my parents. Some of it is just that it's good and catchy, and I enjoy the story. I kind of relate to the characters. So I'd say top 5.
Okay. We were chatting before we started recording. I said this is my second favorite film musical. And Jill has the unwanted task of attempting to guess what my favorite musical is.
Do I get to ask you a couple questions? I've gotten.
You could, yeah. Okay. Strategically drop them throughout, I think, would be a good idea. I definitely love musicals that make people laugh. There's your first clue.
Okay.
So let's jump right into the developmental part of this. I just mentioned showing kids this because of the Von Trapp kids. So there are 7 Von Trapp children. 2 of them are boys, Kurt and Friedrich. Kurt is the younger boy at 11. Friedrich is 14. And then there are 5 girls. Louisa is 13. Then we've got Gretel, who's 5. Marta is 7. I'm going out of order, and I feel so bad because I was told by Georg to make sure I was in order. Brigitte is 10, and Liesel is 16. There we go. I got them. Yep. I got them all. Oh, boy. So as a developmental psychologist by training and being steeped within that world, Jill, what could you tell us about how the film represents classic concepts in developmental psych?
Yeah, and this is one of the things when I really step back to think about, you know, when you asked me the question, why this musical, why does it speak to you? That was one of the things that I thought of. I tend to gravitate right towards the developmental aspects because that's my training.
Yeah.
That's what I tend to fall back
Right.
on. And so we can look at childhood, right? Gretel,
Mhm.
who's 5, Marta, who's 7, Brigida, who's 10, all fall into the developmental stage of childhood. And we see
Sure.
this in their behaviors in ways that really hold up over time, which is also fascinating. This movie's from I believe it was filmed in 1965. So
Mhm.
these behaviors hold up over time, which kind of makes sense. Childhood, the fundamental pieces don't change much. Um,
Yeah.
for example, when Gretel first meets Maria, so we have this scene where Maria has just gotten to the Von Trapp home.
Mhm.
The captain has blown his whistle to summon the children. They all kind of march down the stairs and fall into line, and he asks the children to introduce themselves. And each
Mhm.
child steps forth with military precision and spouts off their name and their age. And you just see little Gretel step forward and step back. She doesn't actually say her age, even though she knows it, right? She knows how old she is. And the
Mhm.
captain steps in, as parents often do for their children, and she's 5.
Yeah, right.
This is common among kids. How many of us have seen a small child who knows the answer, right? Is developmentally, cognitively, they know the answer, but then get frightened. And this is especially true if we think about temperament, with a slow to warm up temperament. And so maybe we could characterize Gretel as having that sort of slow to warm up temperament.
Yeah, or some shyness.
Yep. Initially, it wears off very quickly.
Oh yeah, absolutely. As soon as she's like, I like this Maria gal.
Yes, which is often also very common with children, right? They may be shy at first, and as soon as they decide, hey, this person's okay, you're their new best friend.
Right. And I would say that they these 3 girls are some of the more precocious ones.
Yeah.
Too, just like as a trio, right? So
Sure.
adding Gretel back into the trio, they're some of the more like sassier ones, especially in Auf Wiedersehen and Wiedersehen Goodbye.
Yeah.
They have some of the more theatrical, I'll call them,
Definitely.
exits. And then of course, Gretel with her very sad, I'm gonna sit on the stairs
And
and
scoop myself up slowly.
hands in head, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And
Or head in hands, there we go.
all of this is very common from what we see
Mm-hmm.
of childhood. They tend to be a bit sillier, a bit more free, whereas the older ones are trying to look a little bit more cool. And we'll talk about that when we get to adolescence.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that they say, these 3 girls? What are some of the things that they say or they do that really indicate that they were portrayed like their ages at this time in the movie in 1938?
Yeah. Yeah. So what I like about Marta, what we think about children, they're painfully honest, right? They're brutally honest. Children
Yeah.
don't try to spare our feelings. They don't hold back asking questions that might be socially inappropriate. Children just kind of lay it all on the line. And
Right, they
so
do.
Marta is 7, and as you said, I think precocious is a really great word. And so Marta asks a lot of these questions that kind of belie that childhood honesty.
Mhm.
So, for example, when Georg, when the Captain Von Trapp is talking about his relationship with the Baroness, Marta says, "Well, why don't we ever get to see the Baroness?" Right? Kind of calling him on his behavior in ways that older people probably wouldn't do.
Yeah, I would say my daughter, who's 8, like I said, would absolutely ask that question.
Yeah, painful honesty. We also see, so during that very classic thunderstorm scene where they sing "My Favorite Things,"
Mhm.
we hear, I believe it's Marta asking, "Why does the thunder get so angry?" And that is just such a child question to ask. It shows sort of a basic understanding of what's going on, but also
Mhm.
not, right? Because thunder doesn't actually get angry. And so when I was rewatching and thinking about things to talk about, I was like, oh, that's actually pretty funny that she said that, because it's just so typical of things that children might do or say.
Yeah. I love these 3 girls as they were going through as we were seeing them essentially grow up in a short amount of time,
Yeah.
right? So
Mhm.
they go from being these I want to say maybe sort of aimless because of their ages and having to follow this strict routine with their father and several governesses, that we see them grow spectacularly with Maria around. Like they are they're like butterflies.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's very cute in the sense that like you're watching your own children grow, I guess. I mean, that from my perspective, that at least. But I think one of the differences from the older children is that they didn't know their mother very well, right?
Right, right. And we'll talk a little bit later about loss and grief and how that plays into this story. But these kids were forced to grow up pretty fast. They lost
Yeah.
their mother very young, and they had a father who then didn't necessarily process his grief terribly well. So these children were forced to grow up really fast. And yeah, the younger ones, I'm not remembering off the top of my head how long ago into the story the mother passed away. But
Right. I'm not either.
presumably the younger children wouldn't have known her very well or wouldn't remember her much, whereas the older ones would. So
Yeah, for sure. I would say Gretel and Marta, definitely not. Maybe Brigida knows a little bit more and remembers a little bit more of her mother. But like, it's also important to note here that around the same time of these three girls' development, you know, from Brigida, who's 10 and as older or younger, I guess, previous years is what I'm trying to say, that the captain was gone a lot too, on assignment,
right.
More recently visiting the Baroness in Vienna. And let's be honest, I know to a lot of Americans, like, we look at distances between cities and whatnot, and we're like, yeah, it's not a big deal. Like, the distance between Salzburg and Vienna is a couple of, like, an hour or two. It's like it's not that bad. But he was gone a lot as well. So
there was a choice
like,
at that point.
He was right. And so they didn't get a lot of their parents. Most of their development was occurring with a surrogate, right? A governess.
Yeah. And Liesel, and I'll talk about this in a minute, but Liesel, to an extent too, you see her often step in as the parent figure for her younger siblings.
Yeah. So yeah, let's pivot to adolescence, because the other four children, who I already named, Kurt, Louisa, Friedrich, and Liesel, are all in adolescence. Kurt sort of tweening a bit, if you will, but more along the lines of, I want to say he is a Bart Simpson kind of figure. That's what I grabbed.
Yeah, he's a little
from
goofy. He's a little goofy. Yeah.
Right. So what can you tell us about their development?
Yeah. Well, be careful what you wish for, because within development, I'm an adolescent researcher. So this is
there you go. Yeah, let's hear it.
Yeah, let's hear it. So I a little bit liberally lumped 11-year-old Kurt in with the adolescence. We could probably use kind of right on the verge, but in pre-adolescence. These four,
the way that he's portrayed in the movie, I think adolescence is the better.
Yes.
It's the better realm.
That I agree. Particularly during the thunderstorm scene, you see him, whereas the younger children are unabashedly seeking comfort from Maria, sort of sticking close to her, holding her hand. Kurt is trying to pretend like he's not scared, which is much more consistent with adolescence. These four are much more independent. One of the hallmarks of adolescence is testing out growing autonomy, showing that independence. And we see these four doing that in ways that the younger children aren't doing it. I love the same scene I mentioned with Gretel, where the children meet Maria for the first time. Upon meeting Maria, Friedrich introduced himself by saying, "I'm Friedrich, I'm 14, I'm impossible," which is funny and very kind of on the nose, because 14-year-old boys can be pretty impossible.
I'm not looking forward to it, but yes. And he says, "I'm impossible," and then steps back as if,
very proud of himself, or chest.
Yes, there you go.
Yeah, for sure. But Liesel is the one that I find the most fascinating, perhaps because my research also does a lot with gender roles and looking at, teenage girls. Liesel has played a mothering role. She has clearly stepped in. We don't see her struggle with it much. She seems to take it in stride. I don't know, who knows how realistic that is.
Because we don't see the other governesses, right? We don't see how she reacts or acts in front of other older women.
Exactly. She is very clear with Maria that she's 16 and I don't need a governess.
Right.
And it turns out she does, because as we know, teenagers think that they are mature and independent, but they have still developing prefrontal cortexes, and that leads to a lot of risk-taking behavior, which is actually, I have a blog page for Psychi where I write about a lot of psychology themes in musical theater. And so I wrote a piece about, awesome. Yeah, it's fun. It's been a blast. And I have a lot of my students submit papers, which is very cool. But so in my Sound of Music article on my blog, I talk about how the song 16 going on 17 is an ode to independence, right? It's about Liesel wanting to be more grown up and wanting to do adult things. But we also see her engaging in some risky behaviors along the way. She is sneaking out of her house to meet a boy, right? That is risk-taking behavior for sure.
Right in front of her dad, really.
Blatantly.
Dinner, and then she's like, I'm bouncing. And then Georg is like, I don't remember seeing you after dinner.
Yeah, when she lies, right? She says, I'm going to go take a walk. And I mean, I guess it's a lie by omission, because she was walking, but she was certainly not walking.
She did go for a walk. Yes, indeed.
To meet Rolf.
To meet Rolf.
Yeah.
I got to add here, I love 16 going on 17. And Rolf's line of I'm 17 going on 18.
Obviously.
And I gotta say, the song itself is heartbreaking because of Liesel's arc in the film. Yeah. Because she is so smitten with Rolf, and he just wants to be a good man for her.
Yeah.
But he also has a buttload of ambition.
Yeah.
And spoiler alert, guys, the Nazis do win in Austria for the Anschluss. But the Von Trapps get out. I already said that. But at the end of the movie, when Rolf is faced with a choice, hey, Georg's like, hey man, come with us. And he wasn't saying it outright, but the implication was, you can be with Liesel. He was like, I'm going to be okay with it if you let us go and come with us.
Well,
right?
It was about more than that, too. It was about proving his character, and he, made the wrong choice.
Right. And of course, as you say, he makes the wrong choice.
Spoilers.
And he's like, they're here. Yeah. And Liesel, I think, is just shattered in that moment. We don't really get to spend a lot of time with her reaction to that.
No.
We see a close up of her when she spots Rolf, and she goes, Rolf, and and like, oh, we're trying to hide. What is with people and making noise while hiding?
Well, that was pretty shocking. I probably would have gasped.
Yeah, that's true.
But the crazy thing is that he was smitten with her too. You really,
absolutely.
I think his arc is even more heartbreaking than hers.
He took the ambition over love.
He sure did.
As opposed to the captain, who took love over ambition.
Also true. So they're in a way, they're kind of, foils of each other?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think the way that 16 going on 17 is sung, and it's just like this lighthearted, and I am no student of musical theater, so I don't, this is just my sort of clocking of it from the theming and the setting and all of that, is that the song itself is got this happy note and tune to it, but it's actually hiding a very sad reality.
Yeah, which you don't know about until later. You don't really, the first time, if I try to pretend I'm watching it for the first time, you don't know where that's going to go. You think, oh, this is going to be this like very sweet romance between these two.
And then the reprise between Liesel and Maria when she's seeking advice.
Mhm.
And like you said, the song is about this want, this desire for independence, but
Mhm.
really we could all use advice from somebody else
Sure.
from time to time, right? And so she confides in Maria, and they reprise the song, and it makes the end even more heartbreaking.
Yeah. And all things considered, I would say that Liesel handled heartbreak better than most 16-year-old girls I've seen. She was very mature about it. But that
Yeah,
speaks to, I think Liesel was mature for her age. I think she had no choice but to be growing up in a country on the brink of war, in a family
that's
that
very
had
true.
experienced personal loss, stepping in as a surrogate mother to her siblings. She kind of had no choice but to be.
Yeah. I will say this is my one knock on the movie is that it ends abruptly after they escape,
Yeah.
right? They're on the they're on the
Which
long path through the Alps, which is not how they escaped
never happened.
in real
No.
life.
Completely fictionalized.
Um
Much
I
more
love it.
exciting.
We're going to have to walk through the mountains, guys.
No, we
Did
didn't.
you bring your coat? Yeah, I thought it was so hilarious. But yeah, it's a movie kind of ends just really abruptly. We're gonna have to walk through the Alps and get to Switzerland that way or whatever.
Yeah.
And so you don't have really all that long to dwell on any of the decisions that were made.
No.
Georg's decisions, what happens, what's Maria thinking now? Like, what did I get myself into? I was going to be a nun.
And
And
here
then
we
like
are.
all of the kids, especially Liesel, who
Yeah.
sort of got her own mini arc, of course, her
Yeah.
own sort of C plot, we'll call it. Whereas none of the other kids kind of got any of that. So so we
Right.
don't really get to dwell on that at all.
Yeah.
I wish we did. And so that's my one knock against the film, and it's
Mm.
probably the same knock I would have for the stage play.
Sure. Yeah. 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 But while I'm going to swing us back to adolescence for a second because and I talk about this in my blog, and I want to be very careful to place blame where blame lies. But if we look at Rolf and Liesel's relationship, right? Take a step. Now, Rolf, in the beginning at least, was a good guy. He did not mean her any harm. But oftentimes, teenagers, that's not the case. And in sneaking out to meet with this boy, who her family, they don't know him really much past being the delivery boy. It doesn't really seem to know who he is. That's a risky behavior, right? That Liesel essentially put herself in a position where something bad could have happened to her. Um,
Yeah.
and again, not to victim blame, right? Responsibility always lies with perpetrators.
Hmm.
But we also need to be mindful of adolescent risk taking and know that teens are going to do wonky things
Yeah.
because they are teenagers, because their brains are underdeveloped. And so I love, when I talked about this with my students, we spent a good bit of time talking about adolescent risk taking behavior and why teens might take those risks. She
Yeah.
was chomping at the bit. She could not get out of dinner fast enough to go meet up with this guy.
Right.
And that is so characteristic of adolescence, isn't it? Right? That
Yeah.
idea of not wanting to be around your parents and just wanting to be with your peers. And then when you add romantic relationships into that, it's like the most exciting, salient thing you could possibly think of.
And at the time, like, it was really just going and seeing them and maybe holding hands and
Yeah,
maybe
sneaking a
some
kiss
close
like they
physical
did.
contact. But there was nothing really beyond that. And that
No.
was like the meat of it. They were like, yes.
Yeah.
Right. And so times have changed since 1938 or whatever. So, that more things might happen nowadays than there were there. But you could see the glee on her face. The actress who plays Liesel did a phenomenal job. Also, brilliant set of blue eyes. Holy crap. You just look into them and you get
She's
lost,
gorgeous.
right? I was just like, what? Mesmerized. Rolf, you messed up, buddy.
I messed up. Well, I'm going to date myself for a second.
At least film Rolf messed up.
I actually don't know that Rolf is a real character. I'm actually pretty sure
No, I
that
don't.
he wasn't.
I don't.
I
No.
think he was fictionalized. But
the Wikipedia page for The Sound of Music film has a giant section of accuracy, historical accuracy. So, and I think it runs through. I just skimmed it, but I think it runs through the plot
Oh,
It's just straight down, like as the plot goes. This was not accurate. This was not accurate. This is a little fudging. Yeah. So if you want to read more about it, just go to the Wikipedia page and find out how much of the movie, the entire runtime, is completely. I think it's just their names
and their ages.
their
Like the
age.
skeleton of the story.
Yeah, I'm being less than charitable here, tongue in cheek for sure.
But you're only exaggerating slightly.
Yeah, exactly.
Hello. I thought I just might find...
Liesel is an old 16-year-old.
Yeah.
And I think Maria is also an old soul in a young woman's body, right? How old is Maria in the movie?
According to Google, she's 22. So let's
22.
assume she's in her early 20s. Not much older than Liesel.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. It brings into context, like I said, the reprisal of 16 going on 17.
Yeah.
Between the two of them, and just like I've only lived 6 or so more years than you.
Yeah. And as a nun for part of that. So, she may have more years on Earth, but how many experiences was she really having in the convent?
None in training. I believe she was she wasn't
correct. Right. She was in training, but still she was living in the convent.
Yeah, she was living in the convent, escaping the walls of the abbey every chance she could get, which leads to one of my favorite songs from the movie, which is A Problem with Maria, or Problem of Maria. I forget what the name of the song is actually.
Problem Like Maria.
A Problem Like Maria. There we go. Oh no, they don't have the song listings. Dang it. All right. Yeah. Problem Like Maria. How do you
solve a problem like Maria?
Solve a problem like Maria. One of my favorite.
Funny song.
It is a funny song, and is used quite a bit when somebody's name is Maria. I was reading Reddit the other day, and it's funny how the availability heuristic works, because or that the internet is reading my thoughts and knowing the activity that I do.
Either is possible.
Yes. I was reading a random thread about a different movie on our movies, the subreddit on movies, and somebody was just like, how do you deal with a problem like Maria? And I was like, I got that reference. the meme with Leo DiCaprio. Like, I understood that reference, or Captain America.
Captain America, yeah.
Yeah. It's just like, what? Okay. People need to get out of my head. So Maria's 22. She is trying to become a nun, finding it very difficult to settle down in that kind of life.
Yeah, she's not terribly successful.
No, and she's surrounded by a bunch of successful women who have taken their vows, right? And she can't seem to cross that finish line. And so she's asked to go be the new governess. Small town, right? Just outside of Salzburg. They know that the Von Trapp family is having difficulty holding down a governess. So she's like, this is a good test. Reverend Mothers, this is a good test for Maria. She tells her to go and do that. You don't need to be in the convent right now. And so that sets off the events of the film. And so what stage of life is a 22-year-old in, Jill? And what are the things that we see her experience in this movie?
Sure. So to answer that question, I'll give you a short description of developmental stages. So what we used to end adolescence at 18 and then launch right into early adulthood.
Okay.
And early adulthood would span kind of that 18 to 30 period. That just doesn't make sense anymore. Take an 18-year-old and a 30-year-old. They're just not developmentally in the same place. And the end point of adolescence, we could have a whole conversation just about that, right? It's getting pushed back quite a bit. So developmental scholars, Jeffrey Arnett in particular, theorized this new developmental stage, which he called emerging adulthood. And so emerging adulthood lives right between adolescence and early adulthood. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a precursor. It's that in-between period. And so Maria, as a 22-year-old, would definitely fit into emerging adulthood.
Yeah.
It's characterized by exploration, right? If adolescence is kind of identity and figuring out who you are, emerging adulthood is exploration.
Mm-hmm.
We're still exploring identity a little bit, but now we're exploring love. We're exploring career. We're exploring where we might want to live, what we might want to do in more advanced ways than we were doing as teenagers, but not quite as full-fledged adults yet. And so we see a lot of this, and we see a lot of instability during emerging adulthood because there's a lot going on. There's a lot of transitions and changes and trying things. So we very much see Maria falling into that stage.
And these are our college students, right? You and I both teach college students.
Yeah.
We are teaching emerging adults who are struggling with all of the things that Maria struggles with, right? A woman who is in 1930s Austria and trying to figure out her life, thinks that God wants her to be a nun. That's her plan. Figures out, with the help of others, of course. And I think that's the part that I want to focus on a little bit more, is the help from others.
Yeah.
Figures out that there's actually more and a different plan, according to her, from God, right? And so I want to focus on the help from others, because I think that is a critical piece of emerging adulthood, is this help from others, right?
Of ideal emerging adulthood, I would clarify, of ideal emerging adulthood, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely, right, yeah, because sometimes you don't have help from others, yeah. Absolutely, because Maria gets help not only from the sisters in the convent, but of course, most importantly, the Reverend Mother, the head sister, the head nun, as I called her when we were watching it, the head nun in charge, the HNIC.
Sure is. I like that.
I think she would like that. Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
She would too.
But she also gets help from the children too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, quite a bit.
The children help guide her thinking as well. And we can come back to Georg in a little bit.
And she gets help from the Baroness too, which we'll talk about.
That's true.
It's not necessarily good help, but it's help.
I think that the Baroness was trying something, realized that it didn't work, and threw in the proverbial white towel.
Sure, but it's a great example that not everybody who gives you help and advice has your best interests at heart.
That's true. Yes. Yeah. But I want to talk about our students for a bit, because one of the conversations that folks in both secondary education, I think teachers in secondary education, as well as everyone in higher education, is talking about, college should be for everyone, but not everyone is prepared for college, right? And so this preparedness thing, how do we get students, whatever level of preparedness that they are, when they get to college's front doorstep, how do we help them out with that? You may have seen or read about this, the hidden curriculum, for example, right? Sort of the norms of college that are unwritten, hence the name, right? And so you got to navigate that as well. And if you don't have anybody to help you navigate that, then you're sort of out on the lamb, or out on a limb. Confusing metaphors here. Sort of just flailing around like a flounder fish. I don't know. And who's going to be there to help you, right? And so I kind of see my role as one of a guide for these emerging adults. What do you think?
Yeah, like a Jiminy Cricket for sure.
Yeah. Maybe not their conscience, but yeah.
Gandalf.
There we go. I like that one.
That's an interesting point. I hadn't really made the connection between kind of Maria and our college students, but sure. With no one to support you, what I was thinking about while you were talking is, with no one to support you, you're really forced to fall back on your own ability to self-advocate. And Maria does that relatively well. She's bold. She's, to use your word again, she's precocious. She doesn't really, she's often a little overconfident.
She's a bit sassy.
She's sassy. She's got some snark to her, which is probably why I relate to her.
It was so good. After we watched the first hour, taking it in chunks, I turned to my wife and I was like, I really enjoy. I didn't remember how sassy she was, but I really enjoy it.
Yeah. Then that's Julie Andrews kind of brought that so well.
Yeah, exactly.
But without anyone to help you, you're forced to lean on your own ability to self-advocate. And I think we could take this in a whole different direction, but I think that's where a lot of today's students struggle.
Do you think that Maria has figured out, right? Because by the end of the movie, let's say she's about 23 or so, right? The events of the film are over the course of a year-ish.
Ish, yeah.
Do you think that she has figured it out?
No, I think she's flying by the seat of her pants.
She's flying by the seat of her pants. By looks alone from Georg. It's like when I gotta look up this guy's name.
What are you going for?
Erzeller. When Erzeller catches them as they were about to escape into the night, and she had to just look over at Georg and figure out what the plan is just by his eyes. I was like, "Oh boy, whew." Wait, what happens if you read it wrong, right? Oh my goodness.
Yeah. No,
so you're thinking she doesn't have it in hand. She's fine by the seat of her pants, just sort of going along for the ride.
So yes and no. I think she lands well. And some of that is dumb luck. Some of that is just kind of sass and bravado. So I think she's a good example of emerging adulthood, right? Most of the time, you kind of figure it out. You make a lot of mistakes, you do a lot of dumb crap along the way, but you figure it out and you get there, and you ultimately, it may not be the path that you envisioned, which it certainly wasn't for her, but it's a good path and she ends up okay.
Yeah, she does.
That's the success story of emerging adulthood.
Emerging adulthood in a very tumultuous time too, right?
For sure.
If we consider these same labels for folks in that time period, right?
Right.
Different time period.
It's even tough to do that because if we look at the way adolescence is changing, back in the 30s, it probably did make sense to end adolescence at 18 and then shift right into adulthood because people were, their college wasn't really a thing for all but the most elite and only men at that. They're going to get married right away, start a family right away, all of the hallmarks that we've traditionally associated with adulthood. So it is, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm slapping today's label of emerging adulthood onto somebody from a time where that maybe makes a little bit less sense, but I'm gonna go with it anyway.
I think it's still useful though, and I think you can still do that, right? We didn't have labels of autism for folks in the 1800s, and yet we were like, yeah, that kind of behavior from this luminary is probably autistic, or was on the spectrum somehow. So I think it's okay to, at least this is my opinion. It's okay. It's as a scientist, this is still a non-scientific opinion because it's not my area of expertise. But I think it's okay because these people still existed at a time and still had to, I don't know, maybe not worry about the same kinds of things. I'm not worried about the Nazis. Well, maybe I am. Nazis taking over. That's a tough one.
We should worry about
but be that as it may, I think people still had the same struggle because it's not like when you turn 18, a light switch flips and you're like, I'm an adult now.
God, I
mean,
wish.
You are.
Yeah.
But, and I tell my students this all the time, and it's like, guys, I'm sorry, but you are adults now. I know it's a racket, and you were duped by life, but you're adults now. And yeah, that is the light switch, but nothing changes in the brain. It's like, I have a lot of gray in my beard. And when I ask my students how old they think I am, they're like 40 something. And I'm like, how dare you? Um,
Rude.
yeah, it's like, who are you? But they see the gray and they're like, yeah, it's old. And I'm like, first of all, I'm not that old physically, but also like not that old mentally either. Like, I feel like I'm sharp. Body is not, but mind is still younger. And I think that's what all of this development through the lifespan, you really, it doesn't yet solidify until you're at least like 20s, late 20s, early 30s, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And so some of the struggles that you identified about Maria, I think, would have existed in the 30s as well, even though it was played by a young woman in mid 1960s.
Yeah, and they might have looked a little bit different, but it's the same things, right? The instability, the change. She's leaving the Abbey, she's joining the Von Trapp household, she's going back to the Abbey, she marries. It's the physical. There's physical movement, right, of her location, which is kind of indicative of what we see of emerging adults, right? They're bouncing around between college, between a parent's house, an apartment, all of these things. But also her roles are constantly shifting as well. Oh, I'm a nun. Oh, I'm a governess. Oh, I'm a stepmom, right? Her roles are shifting too, which is what we see, right? You're a college student, you're a romantic partner, you're an employee at a job, right? Your roles are constantly shifting. So it's maybe in a slightly different package, but it's all the same story.
Yeah, it's 100% everything that humans go through, regardless of the time, at least in our modern history, as opposed to sort of prehistory. But like, yeah, we're still struggling with all that tumult, and it doesn't help that for Maria's sake, that tumult is like her thinking of who she wants to be as a person. I mean, the opening is her running through the Alps singing "The Hills Are Alive with the Sound of Music." Yeah. So I mean, like, we see her as what's that? Oh, her truest form at the very beginning of the movie, and then we see her struggle until she marries Captain Von Trapp.
But she also, you mentioned how the kids kind of grew up a lot. Maria grows up quite a bit as well, from that free nun, running the iconic, image of Julie Andrews running with her arms outstretched through the Alps, to the mother of seven that she is by the end of the movie, traipsing this young family across mountains. She grows up quite a bit as well.
Yeah, and like we said, it's about a year-ish.
Yeah.
And Julie Andrews plays it spectacularly. Shifts characters so well. Yeah. So speaking of her becoming a mother at the end, let's shift briefly before we end this first segment in development. Part of development is the other people that are associated with growth and development, and that is parents, for a term that represents the caretakers of children, right? So what are the parenting styles that, generally speaking, appear in the literature and appear in households, Jill?
Okay, so parenting style is there's two dimensions of parenting style. There's warmth and there's control. And so if you imagine, one is a vertical line and one is a horizontal line, kind of making a cross, the four parenting styles represent the four intersections of high and low warmth and high and low control.
Gotcha. Good. Very good. Yeah.
Yep. And so, high warmth and high control is what we'd call authoritative parenting, whereas high warmth and high warmth and high... Yeah, no, that is authoritative. High control and low warmth. There it is. That's authoritarian parenting, which, is very much what we see the captain doing, right? He is very controlling, all about discipline, all about boundaries. He quite literally blows a whistle at the children as if they are animals to obey his commands. And we don't see a lot of warmth love but he loves his children. I'm not trying to say he doesn't, but we don't see it. He's not inherently a very warm, fuzzy man. In the beginning, he softens.
He does. He softens a lot. As soon as he starts seeing his children sing, I think. What is low control, low warmth?
Yeah, that's basically neglectful, right? That's basically
Neglectful.
Yeah, neglectful. That's the parents who, they have you ever seen Matilda? Right?
Yeah.
Matilda's parents are the textbook example. She has shelter, she has food, and that's about it. Other than that, she's essentially raising herself.
And so we've got we've got one more, which is low control, high warmth.
Yep, permissive. Those are Mean Girls, right? The mom, Regina George's mom from Mean Girls, is the textbook example, right? This is the friend. I want to be your friend. I don't want to be your parent. I want to be the cool mom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not great. Where would you say Maria falls in these quadrants?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I probably mentioned I teach a psychology of musical theater class, and so every week we essentially do what you and I are doing right now. It's so fun, and they get a grade for it. It's like so fun. But we did The Sound of Music. They enjoyed it, but said it was long. Fair,
of course. Fine.
And so we had a whole long debate about just that very question.
Okay.
And I'm teaching it again, actually, this upcoming semester. And I haven't ruled out, like, literally dividing my students in half and making them debate. Is she authoritative? Is she high in warmth and high in control? Or is she permissive? Is she that friend parent? Okay. I could go either way.
I guess maybe it would depend on, and maybe keep this in the back. It means just a little, your ace in the hole kind of thing, right? Depends on when in the movie you're talking. Right.
Also true, because we definitely see the captain change. He becomes much more authoritative, which is the better one, the much more adaptive parenting style. We definitely see that change.
I do have a great example of his the moment it shifts for the captain, if you'll indulge me.
Yeah.
And maybe you can use this semester. So I think the moment it shifts for the captain is when the kids go and try to see Maria at the Abbey, and she's not available, of course. And they get back and they're trying to come up with a lie, right? The picking, we picked fruit. Oh yeah, what kind of fruit? Blueberries. Oh, blueberries aren't in season right now. Ooh, it was strawberries. Okay, let me see your strawberries. We ate them all. Yep. Oh, so you ate all the strawberries. Okay. Well, if you ate all the strawberries, then I guess you don't need any dinner. And no, like, both sides know they've caught the lie.
That's
right?
the first time we really see him having fun with his children.
Yeah. Right. And I think that's my point. And then so like he tells them to all go inside, and they're like, but what about dinner? And it seems like he's just gonna be, put his foot down or whatever. And then Maria shows up. And Maria shows up and she's like, hey everybody. And he tells the kids to go inside and wash up for dinner.
Yeah. He was toying with them. But it was fun. It was
fun.
Moment.
But up until that point, you don't know if he's actually going to be serious about saying no to dinner.
Sure. Yeah. Because they did, they clearly were lying to him.
They clearly
lied. And not
lied.
very skillfully either. They were.
No. Never try to lie as a group.
Unless you've pre-planned your story, which they did
right
not.
Unless you've like, all right, this is what we're gonna say, and nobody deviates from this. But they were all trying to lie in the moment, and they all had to do like yes and improv theater.
And you see them rolling their eyes at each other when I think it's Kurt. When the captain says it's too early for strawberries. It's too early for strawberries. Oh, well, they were raspberries, but they turned blue. And you see Liesel and Fred, you see the older ones roll their eyes like they're like, oh, shit. What
are you doing? Stop digging this hole. Yeah. I think that's the moment that he shifts. And I think the reason that he shifts is because Maria returns.
Yes. And I think she sort of sands off a lot of his rough edges, and I think she teaches him to love his children again. He has been kind of numb with grief. I suspect that a lot of this came from him just not processing his grief, and she really melts his ice a bit and
Yeah.
and helps him to reconnect with really the world again. He's shut off pretty much from the entire world. His relationship with the Baroness is completely transactional. There's some affection, but there's no real love there. For the
Yeah.
most part, he's just shut off.
And the conversation that they have on their walk really kind of solidifies that, like, oh man, this is what people want me to do. And, you know, you've got a lot of money. And she's like trying to scheme with Max. And it just kind of falls a little flat.
She's one of my favorite characters. We'll talk more about her. She's one of my unpopular opinion, but she's one of my favorite characters. I love
Interesting.
her. Yeah.
Interesting. One last thing on parenting styles that I think is useful. I see Maslow's hierarchy in a lot of different things. And I definitely think that Maria at the convent was not living up to her full potential. And once she became a parent as a governess, she recognized that this was her path.
Oh, interesting. Her belongingness needs weren't being met until she was a parent.
Right. But I think part of who she thought she was as a human being was what was actualized at the end, because I think it is Gretel who asks her, who says, "Mother, ooh, can I call you mother?" I think maybe it was Gretel. Is it Liesel?
It's Liesel, yeah. Mother, can I call you that? And she said, I like.
And she was just like, "Oh yes, absolutely." Like she hears it, and then she's like, "Oh wait, no, that's me. That's who I'm gonna be. That's who I know.
It's Liesel saying, "Mother, I like saying that," and Maria says, "I like hearing it."
Yes, there we go. Yeah. So there's a little bit of Maslow in there.
Interesting. I never thought of that.
For Maria, and I'm sure there's some Maslow in there for Georg, but he's fine. We'll talk more about him when we get to grief. Okay, so Jill, I wanted to pick your brain. We were talking about grief and loss, and one of the backdrops to the film is that Captain Von Trapp has lost his wife and the mother of the 7 Von Trapp children. So let's take a little bit of a foray into some of these other psych concepts, and specifically like grief and loss with respect to some of the different characters. So let's talk about the captain. He's cold and has a authoritarian parenting style because he doesn't know what to do.
I think there's a lot of reasons why he's authoritarian. He's a naval captain, right? So he's presumably a military man
of a landlocked country.
Yeah, that's a choice. But he's also, it's the 1930s. Gender roles of fatherhood were very different than what we see today. He was probably never expected to give much warmth to the children. That was the mother's role. So I would imagine he kind of just never learned how to be particularly warm. I would imagine that was pretty consistent with men of his time. But then you also have this grief thrown onto a very manly man who is going to struggle with processing grief in a healthy way because he doesn't want to show that weakness. So I think it's a lot of things that kind of come together.
Sure. Okay. I can get on board with that. Do you think that he is retreating to a life that he knows a lot better in his grief?
Yeah. They say that at one point. I forget who says it. It might be the housekeeper. But he runs this house like he's on one of his ships again.
Yeah.
And because he's probably, I think retreating is a good way to put it. That's somewhere that he felt safe and maybe not safe is not the right word, but powerful and in control.
Yeah. With the naval whistle too, and the different pitches, the wee, right, which has been, parodied in so many different things since then. But and making his kids line up in the order that they line up in, ordered by age, right? It is very
military, right? Militant.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, militant, I think, is a good word. very orderly, neat.
Well, I think it's the housekeeper who at one point says the Von Trapp children don't play, they march.
Yeah.
Right?
They march.
They march. When Maria asks about play clothes, and the housekeeper looks at her like she's crazy. Why would these children need play clothes? They don't play. They march. They're soldiers.
Nobody ever asks about the drapes in her room.
No.
I was like, wait a minute. I forgot that she made the clothes out of the drapes in her room. But then I'm like, surely somebody has to say something about the missing drapes in her room.
Well, no, they ordered new ones. That's why she did it, because the housekeeper came in and said, we've ordered new drapes. And Maria says, but these have plenty of wear left in them. And nevertheless, we've ordered new ones.
I missed that completely.
She knew they were being taken down, and she couldn't. I mean, I would imagine as a nun, she's fairly thrifty and didn't like the idea of seeing things go to waste. So she saw the answer to a problem, right? These kids don't have play clothes. I know how to make clothes. Here is this fabric that's going to be wasted. Win, win, win.
Mm-hmm. So he's lost his wife, but he seems to forget that the kids lose something else too. What did they lose?
Yeah, I mean, the kids lost their mother. That's especially at the younger kids, like we discussed. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah. How do you think? Just asking you to speculate here. How do you think the mother was toward the kids?
Oh, that's a good question. I imagine her as a kind of the ideal mother. I think they want you to imagine her that way.
Okay.
As just very warm, very loving, kind of the foil to the captain. You get the sense that they were very happy together because he's showing so much grief at her loss. And because they had 7 children, you'd imagine there was some affection there. So I picture her as kind of the complement to him. If he's the bad cop, then I sort of see her as the good cop. And I believe you hear Liesl talk fondly about her. I may be making that up. But I picture her as a very warm mother.
I picture her that as well. I picture her as sort of how they as an idealized. I think part of their memory is being shifted, but as an idealized caretaker, which is why they act so rudely toward their governesses, because there's like the governesses are never going to rise to the level that mother was.
Partially, but that's also attention-seeking behavior. That's an effort to get their father's attention.
Absolutely.
For sure. But yes, they clearly are missing this figure.
Yeah. And to your point about attention-seeking, they engage in this sabotage of governesses because they want to get their father's attention because he doesn't give them any. When he's home, it's a military academy. And when he's in Vienna with the Baroness, they're at the whims of the governess, and the governess is like, well, my instructions are to do exactly how your father does it. So
it's a great example too of operant conditioning, right? We tend to forget that negative attention is still attention, and for attention maintained behaviors, it's still going to have a reinforcing effect. So
absolutely.
you think of a kid in class who act out, and then you yell at them. If you're yelling at an attention maintained kid, presumably with the intention of decreasing that behavior, you've just done the opposite. So I'm imagining that that's what's happening, right? They act out, they sabotage the governesses. It creates a headache for him. He now has to hire a new governess when she quits. He's yelling at them, thinking that he's going to get them to stop doing it, and all it's doing is playing into exactly what they wanted, which is that attention.
Yeah, and the tables start to turn and shift when he sees how Maria has sort of changed the game.
Yeah,
right?
She's unfazed. She's not bothered by, she sits on that pine cone and just kind of plays it off and ends up, she ends up guilting the children, making them all sob at the dinner table. Like she game, set, match to Maria.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. It was her first day too. And I was just like, get it,
masterful.
Girl. You deserve every bit of their
respected her a bit more after that because they saw,
they're like, this woman's not gonna play because she's not afraid of the captain.
No, she sure isn't.
And I think the other governesses were afraid of the captain, or at least in my opinion, they were afraid of the captain.
I picture a bunch of like dowdy old German Fräuleins who were sort of meek
I
and
would even
scared.
say like old spinster Fraus
Yeah,
coming
for sure.
around.
For sure.
And kind of like the nannies that preceded Mary Poppins. Interesting that Julie Andrews has played two. I'll be better than the previous ones, I promise. Women in her two more famous films.
I'm doing Mary Poppins for my class this semester as well, and I'm very excited. We'll
first time.
First, yes, I haven't used that one before.
Oh, so good. Yeah, Mary Poppins is up at top 5 for me as well.
I will make them all Julie Andrews fans, but
not my favorite though, so you can rule that one out.
Yeah, that one's not. I wouldn't describe it as funny.
No. Well, I do like me some. All I'm getting is Mary Tyler Moore in my head. What is
Dick
his
Van
name?
Dyke?
Dick Van Dyke. Thank you.
He's great.
Love Dick Van Dyke. He's hilarious in that movie. Trying to do a Cockney accent is the greatest. I will say that when I was younger and I first saw Mary Poppins, I thought Dick Van Dyke was British with that Cockney accent. And so when I saw him later in other films and stuff, and he had an American accent, I was like, whoa, what? No. Surely this can't be true. And then
this will happen.
Learned about the Dick Van Dyke Show, and then I was like, oh, okay, all right. Well, I feel silly. One other piece of grief and loss that we can talk about for this film is the setting, right? So the setting is Austria, Anschluss. For those who are not familiar, this is when Austria was like, yeah, sure, we'll become part of Germany, to Hitler. And they just opened the gates and were like, yeah, come on in, Nazis. So we have a bit of characterization for the captain. Very proud Austrian. Max as well. Very proud Austrian. I love the scene where Max is having the kids practice on the town square stage for the performance that they end up doing on the night of their escape. And Herr Zeller comes over and is like, Heil Hitler and all of that, and does the Nazi salute, and Max doesn't want to do it.
It's so awkward.
He and then he puts his hand up very, very limply at the end. Yeah. When they say goodbye, because you had to do it when you first met with someone, and then when you left that person, you had to do it both times. And he limply does it, and then he looks at his hand, and he's got this massive
bewildered
face. Bewildered. I also caught disgust too.
Yeah, I mean bewildered as in like a what just happened kind of way.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on YouTube, somebody has uploaded this part of the movie, my favorite part of The Sound of Music. And it is the scene where the captain yanks the Nazi flag down from his front door.
Yeah. That's powerful. That shows his strength, right? And his power and his own convictions. Say what you will about the captain, but he was a strong-willed man.
Yeah, he was, and I appreciate that because in history class, when you learn about World War II and the things that led up to it, from an American perspective, you're taught that Hitler wanted to unify all of the German lands, which is why he wanted Austria to be a part of Germany, right? So previously, it was the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he thought that was wrong, and he wanted them to join. He didn't want any bloodshed, and they were like, okay, well, we won't do that. And then he wanted the Sudetenland from, at that time, Czechoslovakia, but he wanted it from, the Czech Republic. And he wanted Danzig from Poland, and all of that. He wanted one of the main reasons was he wanted to unify the German world in Europe from the previous Prussian Empire. And so you learn that, but then you don't actually get into the nuance of the identities around that and how a lot of Austrians were against it
quietly.
And I think the captain shows from a Western perspective, it's very interesting that you have a character who is not only grieving the loss of a human being, his wife, right? But also grieving the loss of his identity.
Yeah, and his nation's identity.
And his nation's identity, and looking at it and wondering what happened. How did we get here? And so, Americans are like, yeah, get it, Captain Von Trapp. You're one of us. But he was European because he was a real person who had these same convictions. I just think it's a interesting sort of parallel that we would see in other American cinema,
Yeah.
The last thing I wanted to mention was so, as we said, takes place during the lead up to World War II and Hitler and Nazism and the unwillingness of Max and the captain to conform to Nazism. And the interesting thing that was happening around the same time was Milgram was doing his obedience studies on the other side when the film was being made. The play had already been out by then. But in 1962, Stanley Milgram does his obedience studies at Yale. And then the film comes out in 1965, around the same time when the book about the studies is sort of gaining a popularity and traction and also derailing Milgram's career, unfortunately. So what do you think about contextualization of conformity, obedience, and this film, specifically The Sound of Music?
Yeah, so the fact that this story takes place at the onset of World War II, when we have the rise of Hitler and Nazism as this kind of dark undercurrent, and we have the benefit of hindsight, right? Watching this now from where we're sitting, we know what's going to happen. They don't, right? Remember, these characters don't know what's going to happen. It's a really interesting way to look at conformity and look at differences in who conforms. And so, so Milgram's work, it was based on obedience to authority and was really kind of, why do good people do bad things when they're told to do so, which is essentially what Hitler was. But we also have this idea of conformity, which I think is really interesting as well. We have, kind of the Solomon Asch studies where essentially what he found, these classic social psychology studies, was that people will give the wrong answer. They will go against their own instincts when everybody else is doing it as well. They will conform, like that wanting to fit with the group is so powerful. Humans have such a powerful need to belong. My intro psych students tease me by the end of the semester because probably at least once a week I say, humans are a social species, right? We want to fit in, we want to belong. And so Max conforms, right? Max
eventually,
no, I mean, he does it pretty much throughout. He's not resisting. He may not like what Nazism stands for, but he's certainly not pushing back against it. Max is a very the path of least resistance kind of guy. He doesn't show the same strength of conviction. And he's admittedly, Max is, I find him hilarious because he's basically like, yeah, I'm a selfish kind of money grubbing, like I'm going to go where the money is, but he's still very lovable, right? You still find him very easy to like, even though he's quite weak of character.
Sure.
I don't mean that necessarily in a negative way. They're all different people, but he doesn't push back against Nazism whatsoever, whereas the captain is like absolutely having none of it. And so we could also certainly think about differences in who conforms and who doesn't. The captain obviously has a lot more resources. He's at higher rank. We don't really know who Max. They don't really explain. So he's kind of just like the random fun kooky uncle who comes out of nowhere.
Yeah.
So he does, but he's clearly not as wealthy and not as statist and privileged as the captain.
Right.
So there's a good point in conformity, right? People who have the privilege to do so, obviously it's much easier to push back, like we see with the captain versus someone like Max. But the Holocaust gives us that good, the World War II lead up does give us that good kind of way to think about these things.
I will say though that it's interesting the lack of conformity or the not wanting to conform from the captain when he is a military officer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is the epitome of conformity, right? Everything must be conformed to, regardless of obedience, right? So the conformity and obediency are related but different concepts of social influence. So it's like he is so proud of his identity as an Austrian that he is absolutely unwilling to do the conformity necessary to Nazism, and thus not obeying Nazism.
He's literally willing to give it all up for his country. He loves his country, I would argue, more than his family in some ways, because he makes it would be a whole heck of a lot easier for his family and for his way of life if he would have just given in. But his patriotism and his love for his country, you see it when he sings Edelweiss, the emotion. He doesn't show that emotion about anyone else, not even Maria, not even the children. He loves his country. He's a very deeply patriotic man. And so perhaps that also gives him some of the strength.
And a lot of people in that audience, when he sings Edelweiss for the last time, at least in the movie, he might sing it again. He sings it for the last time, and the crowd, the audience full of Austrians, participates.
Yeah.
And it's a very powerful moment where he gets this one last look at these people, his fellow country folk, who are as deeply as patriotic Austrians as he is, but are not in a position to do anything about it and must take it, where he has resolved to get everyone out of there because he finds that Nazism is a fate worse than death.
Yeah, worth giving up his beautiful home and his status in his country, but worth giving up this country that he loves. So I would rather not live in the country that I love than be a part of what destroys it. That's powerful.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that sentiment is shared with a number of folks in that time period. Like Albert Einstein had similar musings about having to leave Europe. I think Ivan Pavlov just really disliked the Bolsheviks and wanted to leave, but then ultimately died in the Soviet Union anyways. So I think a lot of people in that era and things that and people that we know as historical figures or famous psychologists have felt that way. And I'm sure there are some Americans that we could throw down on there as well. Right? Not Benedict Arnold, though.
I'm not gonna lie, history is not my forte. I would need to do some research before we keep going in that direction.
That's okay. You can just accept everything that I said
I just agree.
as absolute truth
to everything that you said.
Yes. Exactly. Fun fact as we end this segment here, the lavishness of the home and the amount of wealth that is portrayed in the movie of the Von Trapps having, completely overstated. They were not that wealthy.
But it makes for a much better story.
Not that wealthy. And so getting to Vermont was a bit of a struggle, of course, if you want to read more about how the Von Trapps escaped Austria. But with the money that they did ultimately were able to keep, they started a ski resort in Vermont.
Yeah, and they sang, right? They did sing. They didn't make that part up.
Yeah, they did sing. Yes, of course. They sang. They were able to make money that way, but they were not like the exterior shots of the Von Trapp family was a Schloss, which is German for castle in Austria outside of Salzburg. So you definitely did not have that money. Yeah, they were not that well off. I mean, you got to imagine. Why was he getting with the Baroness in the first place? She was onto something with the money that she had, right?
Could be.
You were saying why she's one of your favorite characters. Really quickly, why is she one of your favorite characters?
So there are the relationship between Maria and the Baroness is fascinating. So as somebody, my work originated in looking at the way that girls use aggression against one another.
Okay.
I was so interested as a teenager. I was bullied really badly, as so many teenagers are. And it really is what drove me into psychology. I was fascinated by the question of why are girls so ever-loving mean to one another?
Yeah.
And so that really drove a lot of my early work, and my graduate training was in this area of adolescent social development and bullying and whatnot.
Very cool.
The Baroness is a bully, but she is masterful. She is suave, and she is polished, and she is glamorous, and she wields that social savvy with such a just brutal precision that you have to respect her for it. Maria is so unworldly. She's so naive. She's a good person in her heart. The Baroness is not a good person. She's a deeply self-interested, self-serving person. And so a lot of times when we think about that question of why are girls so mean to each other, a lot of it, if you take an evolutionary psychology perspective, a lot of it comes down to intrapersonal competition for mate, right? For the high status, powerful mate. And that's what's happening here. There is competition. The Baroness is savvy. She sees the connection. Maria doesn't see it because she's kind of oblivious and naive and very sheltered. But the Baroness takes one look and she has a solid read on that situation. She sees her man is interested in this woman. And so she plays it so cool. She swoops in, darling, let's not pretend not to notice, not to know when a man is interested in us. She convinces Maria to leave. And when you look back at it, Maria would think that it was completely her idea. The Baroness is so masterful in the way she manipulates this other woman. And it's bad. I'm not saying she's a good character. I'm saying she's a fascinating character. And when I did this discussion with my students last time, they were horrified because when I said I thought I found her fascinating, they were horrified because she's a terrible person.
Yeah.
Like, no, you gotta respect the woman's game. And they were like, all right, I'll begrudgingly give you that. So that's
the death of nuance there is that people that I find to be fascinating or interesting, I ultimately I like. It's like, that's not what I said at all.
Yeah.
So good luck for this semester on that one. You'll have to tell me whether or not they give you the same. This group of students gives you the same read as the last one.
I will say, just to quickly touch on the class, one of the things that I found so fun about this class is that I did an abysmal job of predicting who my students would love and who they would hate. They loved Miss Hannigan from Annie, loved her, whereas she's a terrible child-abusing human, but they loved her. Dear Evan Hansen's mom, hated her. No sympathy for this poor woman trying to raise this socially anxious teen alone. So I found that that was fun. That was just like a new discovery every week.
Yeah. That sounds really fun.
It was fun.
Very good. Very good. Well, I want to thank Dr. Jill Swirsky for joining me to discuss the sound of music. Before we say goodbye, Jill, is there anything that you'd like to tell the listeners about, to plug where folks can find out more about your work and other things that you do?
Yeah, so I mentioned that I edit a blog page for Psychi. And they
Very cool.
publish it's been really fun. I've had a really good time with it. We publish articles that highlight psychology themes in popular culture, broadly defined. So unsurprisingly, I've written several about musical theater pieces. Actually Wicked was my first one, kind of inspired by that the story I told you earlier. But I've done Grease, I've done Fiddler on the Roof, Hairspray, The King and I, you name it. But the page welcomes contributions from anything pop culture broadly related. And more often than me publishing, what I do is I have my students submit papers. So if you have any sort of pop culture related assignment, this is a really great publication opportunity for your students.
Okay, yeah, I like that. I will link the blog in the show notes. Absolutely.
And if you're interested in teaching a psychology of musical theater course, the syllabus is posted on STP's project syllabus.
Oh, okay. Very cool.
And if anyone does teach the class, reach out to me and let's chat about the films you picked, because my goodness, did I have a hard time picking which ones I wanted to focus on.
I can imagine.
So also for those of you who are psychology instructors who may be considering teaching pop culture courses, I work with a team of researchers. We call ourselves the Thematic Instruction Consortium. And we've been conducting research on teaching themed classes. We have a paper that's coming out, should be coming out in the next month or so. We also have developed a series of open access modules for using Sesame Street to teach developmental courses.
That's
I'm
very
the black
cool.
sheep. I'm the black sheep in our group. They're all Sesame people. That's how they connected. I don't know diddly about Sesame Street, so I'm not sure how I ended up here. But if you teach anything even remotely developmental related, and you want to check out the modules, there's some really great stuff on everything from bullying to loss and grief to addressing homelessness. There's everything. And so feel free to use them. They're open access.
I will link that as well in the show notes. Well, thank you again for joining me, Jill. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And there are plenty of other musicals to be explored if you want to have me back. I was hoping we'd talk about Wicked. We actually really didn't talk about Wicked, but with Wicked Fever, that would be a fun one to do too.
Maybe around the time that the second part comes out.
Amazing.
Maybe we'll try to do that. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. Until the next one, thanks for listening.